I recently presented at the Geographical Association conference this session here. Coming back for seconds is a time for a new relationship with secondary data. And in that, one of the things I looked at was how typically we go about assessing our mapping and graphing of secondary data. And it tends to look something like this. Here we have an exam question where a data set and a map is given and the students are asked to hand draw a Choropleth map, and indeed maybe something like this where they're asked to complete by hand a graph. Now, not that there's anything wrong with teaching them some of the basic skills of how to hand draw these things, but to me, given the digital tools that are available to us as geographers now, these should be a means to an end, not the end in itself. They shouldn't be the destination of where we're going. And indeed, it was a tweet just over the weekend from Briley, who was asking, does anybody have sex ratio world maps? And as I had a wee look around to see what I could find, as is often the case these days, I was able to find one that included the actual data set itself. So I was able to bring that into a spreadsheet, and what you discover here is that this is, first of all, a very, very big data set. So this is one of the reasons why I think using these digital tools can be really helpful for us, because the size of the data sets that we're looking at these days, particularly when they're in global scale, are so big that hand drawing graphs based on these becomes laborious, especially when you've got the digital tools of the spreadsheet available to you. So in this case, we have this data set. I brought it into ArcGIS, and as it comes in first of all as proportional circles. Now I'm just going to change the base map here because I'm not doing something based on physical geography this time, it's just human geography. So I just want to really see what we can see with these circles. And if you have a look at the pattern here, it would seem to suggest that there's not much variation across the world in terms of gender balance or imbalance. That is, until you start to zoom in here, of course, in the Middle East a little bit more, and what we see here is that there's some very, very large circles here. So it seems to suggest that there's something that we need to look at about the spread of the data set. That brings us back into our spreadsheet. Now you could draw by hand a graph here, but why do that whenever the click of a few buttons produces a histogram like this? And you're immediately getting the students into some interesting analytical work whenever it comes to histogram. Because you can see here there's definitely a very, very dominant modal class. Most of the data are found close to the actual average here. But look at the spread here, and there are some significant outliers. Small number, but a very significant outlying value in that small number. And that's what's skewing the circles here a little bit. Okay, so if we map this using a Choropleth map, it would take exactly the same data set and turn it into a Choropleth map. What we see is the same kind of skewing is coming out on this map. There's the Middle East showing, and of course on the other end we see Russia and some of the Eastern European countries. But most of the countries in between are kind of merged together. Now, if we were doing this by hand, what we would do is take this data set, we would come up with our class intervals and we would start to map it, and it would take quite a long time to do that, and then we would end up with this, and you might go, that's not really what I want. So if you end up like that, you have to go right back to scratch again. You have to start from coming up with your new class intervals and hand draw it all over from scratch again. So that brings me to what I think is the second great benefit of using digital tools for this. The first one was how we handle big data sets quickly. The second one is how we can handle data sets in an iterative manner. We can tweak in real time. So let me go in here to look at some of the ways that we can examine how the software has mapped this data and some of the choices it gives us. Now, again, there is our histogram. So we're seeing that modal class, but we're seeing the significant outliers, which is producing this on our map here. But we notice that what this is doing is going from high to low. We do have some other options in this, however, and those other options would include going above and below the average. So if we select that, there is the average there, and this is beginning to show more variation than the previous one did. Now I can choose the coloring symbols. Now some of you may object to what I'm about to do. That's absolutely fine. You can map it in whatever way you like. But just to try and make this a little bit easier for us to see at a glance, I'm going to use the stereotypical colors for males and females. I need to invert that, and that shows the pattern. And we can see here that there's a concentration of an imbalance of males in the Middle East, which we saw, and we're seeing some here as well in Asia. But again, we're still being very much affected by those outliers. So let me see if I can tweak this a little bit more. Let's engage in this iterative process. I'm looking at the histogram here and I'm seeing that my data set is all the way down here. So I'm going to drag this down until it comes into the data set and look at the difference it makes in Asia. What it's allowing me to see here is that there are many countries in Asia with a gender imbalance of more boys than girls. Now, knowing what I know, and what you'll know about China and the population policy there, that immediately highlights something that I would want my students to be aware of and to investigate. What is it here and what is it here? You know, those are interesting questions. Get into like the construction industry here, but what is it about the population policy here? What's going on in India? So what I'm getting them to do here is to engage and interact almost immediately with interesting subtle analysis, which is prompting exploratory questions to get them to really take this further. One final thing that I'm going to show you here is Africa. Africa looks like it's all very similar when we're looking at something that has the spread of data for the entire world. So let me just click on OK and done with this. And I'm going to introduce a filter here this time. And we're going to just go in to take a look at Africa alone. We can get rid of everything else, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer here on Africa. Now there is the data set that has been brought in, or the mapping I should say, based on the spread of the data set for the whole world. But let's see what we can do to improve the cartography here. So first of all, I'm just going to change the label a little bit here. I'm going to reduce or increase the transparency. So the country names are there, but they're not dominating. So there's another little iterative tweak. But then I want to come in here to this, and in here back into my options again. And again, I'm going to zoom in to the data here, and I'm going to now pull this down even further into the data set here. What I'm wanting to do is to get some of the blues to appear where they are. And we'll pull this up here, and we might need just to tweak this, the overall thing just there. So this, yeah, that's starting to appear now. So there we see this iterative process. Really what I want to do is to get some of those dark blues beginning to appear, all the way down to the darker pinks, so that I'm revealing the pattern that is there. It's absolutely there in Africa. If I just use the process and the mapping process for the entire world, the spread of the data set would be such that a lot of that would be missing. But now we have again some really interesting exploratory questions. There definitely seems to be a north-south difference in Africa. What is it about the northern part of Africa and the southern part of Africa that makes these patterns different? What a brilliant way again of using the analytical tools of this iterative tweaking, real-time adjusting process of the maps to prompt powerful and interesting geographical questions. So, yes, by all means, let's begin with hand drawing the maps, if that helps to point out some of the details to the pupils at the start. But let's not finish there. Let's embrace these digital technologies and all that they offer us to introduce our pupils to really powerful analysis and interesting explanatory and exploratory questions.